Senator Scullion.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise also to support the notice of condolence. David Thomson grew up on a property outside Sale, and we've heard already that by the date of his birth, this was during the Great Depression. And I think most of his friends would reflect on his toughness. In almost any circumstance, he just didn't seem to waver from the course that he had chosen. Many people reflect that it was pretty tough during the Depression. His mum died when he was 7 years old. His father returned from the Great War after serving with the Australian Light Horse. And sadly, he was affected by a debilitating illness. So growing up basically without a mum, and a father was was limited in his capacity to be able to assist his son. He grew up to be a pretty tough young bloke. But he did get a break. His grandmother left him £100, and in those days that was like a small fortune. It was certainly enough to take him on his chosen road of getting an education. So he entered Scotch College in Melbourne, and he graduated from Scotch College and decided that the military was his calling. So he graduated from Duntroon in 1943, and I was reflecting on a number of media and quotes earlier today, and quite clearly this is a man who men would follow, and he was already picked out in Duntroon as somebody that was going to make a real impact in his military career. So less than 2 years after stepping out of Duntroon in 1945, he was part of a force that embarked to take the beach at Balikpapan. We would all know, any people who are interested in history, that this was a very, very nasty part of the world to be in, very heavily defended. He was shot as part of the advance, stayed on, and continued to lead his troops through the particular period of time in Borneo. His courage and leadership were already noted, and it was unsurprising to many that in 1952 he was awarded the Military Cross while he was serving as a company major of the 1st Royal Australian Regiment in the Korean War. It's already been made mention. This particular military event took place on sadly a hill with just simply a number, Hill 227. As many were in that part of the world, there was nothing more romantic than that, but a lot of people lost their lives on that hill, and it was on the 3rd attempt. The convention was to take these places at night. There wasn't a great deal of cover, and these were the days when if you couldn't see someone, it's pretty hard to shoot them. Nowadays, of course, we have far greater technology. And so the conventional method of warfare was to go in at night. There was normally just you count up your numbers and hope for the best. But in a very daring change, he decided that this would something that would take place during the day, and as a distraction, asked a band to play the pipes. And it was quite a distraction because on the day he was able to take Hill 227 and despite being injured himself, was able to hold the day. He continued his military career by commanding a battalion during the 1966 Indonesian confrontation, and after his service there, very notable service, he retired in 1972. So I would like to offer the David Thomson's family and loved ones my heartfelt condolences. As former member of Leichhardt, I'd particularly like to note his contribution to the life of Aboriginal and Islander people in his electorate. And Senator Abetz has already mentioned the work he did around the Mornington Island, and I don't think that's so much surprising, but if you think about the times, he was a conservative individual, a member of the National Party, and I think he went, particularly in those times, out of his way to simply represent the interests and the views and the values of all his constituents. And you have to talk about courage and bravery. It's easy to do the things that are easy, and I just can't imagine how tough it would have been for David Thomson in that particular regard. And people shouldn't have been surprised. Certainly, he highlighted in his maiden speech on the 24th of February in 1975, at that time there were probably more than 20,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders living in Leichhardt, which is about 16% of the population, which is very high. It's second only to one of our electorates in the Northern Territory. Unfortunately, after all this time, many of the issues that we know about that were relevant then continue to be pertinent now. In his maiden speech, he gave expression to the view that I suppose policies needed to encourage independence and empowerment of Indigenous people in all the decisions they make. And I think even today it's only been of recent history that we understand if particularly Aboriginal and Islander communities don't have some ownership in the process to deal with a decision that affects them, then we're much less likely to get the outcome that we're all requiring. There we were back in 1975, Mr Thomson was articulating what we know now to be an absolute fundamental about moving forward in these areas. He was very passionate about Indigenous people being consulted in matters that concern them. So rather than leave it to others, it was in fact David who used to sit down amongst the Aboriginal and Islander people in his electorate and around those areas and ensure that he spent time with them rather than allowing others and department to consult. He made sure that he was a part of those communities and he could genuinely reflect on the views of those communities. And I think while some things haven't changed, there's much in the life of Aboriginal and Islander people that has improved. And I'd like to honour the contribution, the special contribution that Mr Thomson made in his role as a member of Leichhardt and for his contribution to the National Party. I think it's also useful to remind this place that it was his determination that the north of Australia and our Aboriginal and Islander people would not remain out of sight and out of mind, and that our First People would have to be in partnership with moving forward as we shape the future of that rich part of the world. He was a courageous and committed member of and a true Australian entrepreneurial spirit. I think that his time as a minister really showed that he was happy to take on the big issues as he was with the Aboriginal and Islander issues, and take them on, particularly when it perhaps not have been the most popular. As a minister, he was always concerned about the welfare of the Great Barrier Reef, and he was one of the first ones in the day who said there should be no drilling on the Great Barrier Reef. He was the one who said they will drill the Great Barrier Reef over my body. And a National Party person indeed, Senator Boswell. I'm not so sure how our opponents would say how far we've proceeded ahead on that matter, mate, but he was certainly well in front of his time. And of course, when you are ahead on these issues and you are reflecting the values and the aspirations of your community, you get the support of that community. And that's why he was simply so popular in his seat of Leichhardt. He also had a number of people in Leichhardt who were very keen to ensure that the ban on kangaroos was lifted. And it was a very, very important issue for Australians then, particularly people in the bush, particularly people who relied on culling kangaroos and selling them. And he was somebody who was a great advocate and was definitely a part of the US decision that allowed the import of kangaroo products into the United States and the lifting of a ban on the native fauna. While David was in Parliament, he served nobly on the Standing Committee for Aboriginal Affairs and on the Joint Committee for Foreign Affairs and Defence. On behalf of the government, I offer condolences to his family. Vale, David Thomson.